Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's WEConnect International webinar. My name is Maggie Berry. I'm the Executive Director for WEConnect International in Europe, and I'm delighted that you've joined us for today's webinar, Is Your Business Ready for GDPR? Our presenter today is Sem Ponnambalam from xahive, a WEConnect International certified women-owned business based in Canada. They are cyber security specialists and provide safe and secure cybersecurity solutions in the internet-based communication space. Today's webinar is going to give us an introduction to GDPR, which is the EU's General Data Protection Regulation that's coming into force at the end of May. So it's a strict new set of rules concerning privacy and data security, and the regulations do impose strict penalties on violators, including small businesses, and Sem is going to tell us a lot more. To keep background noise to minimum, I've got all of the participants on mute, so please do use the chat functionality if you've got any questions, and there will be time for discussion and questions at the end. Sem's probably going to talk for about 40 to 45 minutes, and the session is being recorded, so you will be able to listen back to it again. So, Sem, thank you so much for presenting for us this afternoon. I'm going to give the presenter rights over to you so that you can start. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Sorry, Maggie, did you say something? I couldn't hear you.
No, the floor is yours. You're fine.
Okay, perfect, perfect. Okay, thank you, everyone. First off, I'd like to thank WEConnect International Europe team and WEConnect International members for joining us across Europe. And I heard from Maggie as far as even Africa, so I'm pretty excited that we have a large spectrum of WEConnect members on board. I hope everyone's keeping well today. Just wanted to quickly give you a 2-second background on xahive. xahive is a cybersecurity company, as Maggie had mentioned. We offer secure encryption communication services, which is compliant in Canada, US, and EU. And also we offer cybersecurity education and governance audit services. And for some of you, just to let you know, we have offices in Ottawa, Canada, Los Angeles, and New York. So for today, you can see the objectives that we're going to go through. First off, what is GDPR? Who does GDPR affect? Penalties for non-compliance, key changes to GDPR and steps to prepare for compliance, and finally, a data breach recovery plan. Okay, before I start off, I just wanted to go through a quick survey that was done across Europe with 400 EU companies. According to the survey that took place, it essentially indicates that companies are unprepared for the EU's General Data Protection Regulation. And as Maggie had mentioned before, this comes into effect on May 25th of this year. And essentially, it's not just yourselves, even enterprise-level clients are finding it quite difficult to meet some of these requirements. So I just wanted to let you know that less than 12 months before the new regulation came into effect, only about 8% of businesses actually said that they were GDPR ready and took the necessary steps to make the changes to ensure that they're compliant. Meanwhile, 28% said that they were completely unaware of the regulations that they had to adhere to. And finally, 26% of the business leaders said that they were familiar with the GDPR strategy and that they weren't sure if they would be compliant on time. So I just don't want you to think that you're the only ones in that boat. So we'll just quickly go through what is GDPR. And so GDPR was introduced by the EU Parliament on April 14, 2016. And essentially they approved and adopted the General Data Protection Regulation. This is to bring a single cohesive system of privacy regulations to the EU. And they were hoping that this legislation will strengthen the protection of individual privacy rights and ensure that businesses can adhere to these new changes in a more simplified manner. So any information that's related to, as they deem it, as a natural person or data subject, can be used directly or indirectly to identify a person who constitutes personal data. So it can be anything as for example, your name, an email address, bank details, posts on a social networking website, medical information, or even a computer IP address. So who does GDPR affect? So GDPR casts a wide net, essentially applying to any organization that offers goods or services to EU residents, even if they're not based within the EU. So organizations should ensure that they examine the applicability of the GDPR to whatever processes they have set in place. So they must consider what operational changes may be needed to reduce the impact of GDPR across any of your activities or to fashion compliance strategies. So that's important to keep in mind. So this is the big item that everyone's worried about. What are the penalties? So there's a two-tier sanction regime. So the bigger sanctions are targeting the enterprise level folks. Okay, breaches of some provisions by businesses could lead to fines. This is for the enterprise level folks. Okay, for up to 20 million euros or up to 4% of the global annual turnover for the preceding financial year, whichever is higher. So this is the maximum. So I mean, in this case, you don't have to worry about it. What you do have to worry about, because most of you are SMEs, the minimum requirements, and you adhere to whatever the requirements are. Because the thing about GDPR, we'll get into the next few slides, is that it's not only the EU, but it also depends on each individual member state. So if there are specific questions that I wanted to point out, there are a few questions that we had received before, and I will go over those responses at the end of this presentation as well. So as you can see, for SMEs, maximum fines could be 10 million euros or 2% of global annual turnover. So essentially, you have to ensure your data protection is by design and by default compliant. Security of your processing data has to be compliant, and you need to have processes in place in case there is a breach, and to the appropriate supervisory authority, and communication of your data to the actual subject. So that's very important. So GDPR allows data subjects to seek monetary damages in court from controllers and processors who violate their rights. So as I mentioned before, it could be as simple as a name, email address, IP address. So you need to ensure that you have steps taken to cover these. People who may take you to court may bring action for damages or for compensation before courts of any member state within the EU where they reside or where the controller or processor has been established. So the member states may also provide their own rules, as I mentioned, on either criminal sanctions for infringement. And depending on the national laws or the regional laws of the two member states, for example, Denmark and Estonia, they do not allow for the requirements of administrative fines as set out in GDPR. So if you have clients in these regions, that works well. But in the case of Denmark, they do have competent national courts may impose fines as a criminal sanction and through a misdemeanor procedure framework for the case in Estonia. So these are just some of the examples. Key changes. So what changes should your business be looking at? For the case of data portability, GDPR allows individuals to receive their personal data in a structured, commonly used, and machine-readable format so that they can take their data elsewhere. In addition, the right to portability extends not only to data, but it's the information that's provided knowingly and actively, but also to data generated by the individual's activities. For example, if it's social media, depending on what they're using, you need to be able to provide that information as well. So the next one is related to consent. The GDPR imposes new requirements around consent, and businesses cannot just simply roll up consent into a single package. First, you must adhere or must be an affirmative act by the individual, the consent. Secondly, consent must be separately given for each use of personal information. Third, consent must be given freely, and consent will not be a valid ground for processing if there is a clear imbalance of power. So the GDPR establishes a threshold of 16 years of age for consent, although individual countries can reduce the age of consent to anywhere between 13 and 16. So it's very important to know what the individual countries require. As well, a right to erasure. So GDPR allows individuals a right to be forgotten. So this essentially means that the right enables individuals to ask for any of their personal data to be erased without undue delay. So as a business, you need to have policies in place to do this as soon as you get the request. In cases where a data controller has made the data public, there is a requirement to take reasonable steps to inform other data controllers of the withdrawal of consent. So if you are working with an ISP provider, you need to ensure that that ISP provider has GDPR policies in place to ensure that the data of your clients will be protected, or if they ask for it to be the right to erasure, then they have to have those policies in place as well. So related to data breach reporting, as we mentioned before, GDPR imposes strict data breach provisions. Data breach must be reported to the supervisory authority without undue delay. This report must be made where no later than 72 hours after an organization becomes aware of a breach. Interestingly enough, an organization must only communicate breaches to an individual when the breach is likely to result in a high risk to the individual's rights and freedom. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Now, security and privacy by design. GDPR requires organizations to take steps to establish privacy as a foundational basis of their developmental life cycles. So privacy must be embedded in every stage of the process. Organizations must implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure a level of security that is appropriate to the unique risks of their business. So next is encryption. Within the GDPR, encryption can be viewed as a get-out-of-jail-free card. This is because encryption is an investment in technology aimed at reducing the data loss, and fines are based on the investment in the risk and reduction, but also because it eases the requirement to inform data subjects, so people whose data has been compromised if that data has been encrypted. Finally, data protection officers. So it's good to have someone within your organization be responsible for the data protection, and they must be appointed for all public authorities under GDPR, and where the primary activities of the organization involve regular and systemic monitoring of data subjects on a large scale, or where the entity conducts a large-scale processing of special categories of personal data. For example, racial or ethnic origin, political opinions, and anything similar to that. So if you're involved in healthcare, or if you are discussing things on social media, depending on what type of business you have, it's important to be aware of this. Next, we'll go through some of the 12 steps in order to ensure you're compliant. Organizations must be ready to be by May 25th to ensure that you are compliant. So the following steps are, in terms of awareness, ensure that decision makers and employees in your organization are aware of the impending changes resulting from GDPR. So this means whether you take a cybersecurity GDPR 101 course, that would really help you out. The next one is data holding. So document what personal data your organization holds, where it came from, who it's shared with. This includes reviewing contracts, especially with third-party vendors, and who will also be affected by the new regulations. So remember, it's not just your own organization. You need to ensure that anyone along your value chain is also ready for GDPR requirements. And you have to also have a communication plan in place. So you need to review your current privacy notices and implement a plan to notify and communicate your privacy information. Individuals' rights. So GDPR, as we mentioned before, it enhances the rights of individuals in areas or erase information altogether. You need to ensure that your organization has procedures that support these requests. Data access requests. So you need to update procedures and implement a plan on how your organization will manage requests within the new time frame. Processing personal data. Essentially, you need to be able to identify the lawful basis for your organization's processing activity in the GDPR. Document this and update your privacy notice. Consent. Review how your organization seeks, records, and manages consent. Update existing consent policies and procedures, and if they don't comply, make sure that they do comply with GDPR requirements. I'm not sure how many of you have businesses that work with children, but there are special requirements for this. So the GDPR imposes special provisions and protections for minors' personal data. So you need to review policies on how your organization processes data specifically to children and how you determine someone's age. Data breach reporting. So you need to ensure, again, that your organization has the proper procedures in place to detect, report, and investigate a personal data breach. Data protection. The GDPR introduces requirements for privacy by design. This concept essentially ensures privacy is in place by design rather than adding it as an afterthought. So whatever you do, your organization should prepare privacy impact assessment procedures to apply to existing new systems. Next is the data protection officers. As we mentioned before, you need to designate a data protection officer and ensure that your organization has all the requirements in place and tools in place to ensure that this particular protection officer is prepared in case there are any issues that come up under GDPR. Finally, you need to determine which lead data protection supervisory authority your organization is required to report to. So it really depends on what type, who you work with, and which countries you work with. So if your organization deals with citizens in multiple EU member states, then you need to consult your legal team to determine which regulator you're required to report to. Okay, so now we're going to go through a data breach recovery plan. So when a breach is discovered, it is essential to act comprehensively and efficiently, or the cyber breach could expose your business to greater liability. So the first step you're going to do in terms of response is to identify the problem. By establishing the facts surrounding the attack, your organization will be able to respond appropriately. Your company stands a better chance at being able to inform those affected by the breach, as well as mitigating any further damage. So you'll need to enlist the service of a third-party cybersecurity specialist who are CISP certified if your business lacks sufficient expertise. Second, containment. Once the breach has been identified, your IT department or team should possess the necessary skills or have access to third-party cybersecurity auditors to implement an incident response plan. Your recovery policy should include the following steps. Immediately disconnect any affected communication, cleanse the system of unwanted files, run security patches and software updates, isolate critical data, initiate new login procedures, and uninstall and reinstall affected files and programs. Step 3, reporting the incident. Although a breach will have a negative impact on your organization, you are required to inform all affected parties of the breach. You must report the breach to your supervisory authority without undue delay. And then this report must be made where applicable no later than 72 hours after becoming aware of the breach. So you must also inform all the affected individuals when the breach is likely to result in a high risk to the individual's rights and freedoms. If you notify your customers, your regulators, and law enforcement in a timely manner, this will demonstrate that you've taken all the required efforts to prevent further attacks. Finally, prevention. Once the immediate threat has been isolated and eliminated, it's important that the incident be reviewed and analyzed by third-party cybersecurity experts. And lessons from the incident need to be acknowledged and learned, and that means you need to put in new policies and procedures to prevent this from happening. Fifth, prepare for repercussions. As a result of a data breach, it is common for individuals affected by the breach to pursue damages and compensation. A good recovery policy should always include managing complaints, legal action, and dealing with any relevant enforcement teams. So being proactive as part of the step 3 can help mitigate the risk. Finally, remain vigilant. So maintain a high standard of security is crucial, as it specifically in terms of staff education. So you need to educate not just yourselves, your board, and your staff, at least on a quarterly basis. Regular training and updates of different risk mitigations should be mandatory, and this way it affects any, in this way, if there are any breaches, you look like you've taken all the appropriate steps, and oftentimes in terms of fines, they tend to be much more lenient towards organizations who've taken the appropriate steps to protect themselves and their customers and value chain. Finally, I just wanted to quickly go through, we have a special pricing for WEConnect International members. So if you are interested in having us be your third-party virtual CISO, we do offer privacy reviews as low as under €10,000. And we also offer the encryption tool. So depending on the number of users, if it's 20 users, it'll be approximately €4,000 per year. So it's as low as 55, cents per day per user. And for 10 users, it's as low as €2,200. And finally, we also offer cybersecurity courses. So it's €400 per student, or for groups of 10, it's €300 per student. But please feel free to contact us if you have other requirements. We can certainly work with you on that. And thank you. Now, before I open it up for other questions, I just wanted to address some of the questions that were posed to us earlier. And I'll quickly go through some of the responses, and then I can open it up for questions from the other audience members. The first one is, what are the implications regarding one-to-one work, coaching, counseling, etc., and how long do you keep your records? The implications are pretty much same regardless of which sector you're in. In this case, I would mention that right to be forgotten and right to erasure is granted even if the initial data was collected while the data subject was a child and isn't anymore. So if you keep records until one of two conditions are met in this case. The data subject requests their data to be erased, right to erasure, or the work with the data subject is concluded and the data is no longer needed as part of a public health research project. Another question that was posed is how GDPR will affect B2B companies. So as we mentioned before, GDPR casts a wide net, essentially applying to any organization that offers goods or services to EU residents, even if they're based outside of the EU. So organizations should ensure that they examine the applicability of the GDPR to their processes. They must consider what operational changes may be needed, in this case to reduce the impact of GDPR across the activities to ensure compliance. Following question is, as a printing company, we take on a lot of documents and artwork for printing. On the artwork, there is normally contact details from the client for self-advertising. We are required to hold on to a copy of any printed work that a client sends down. Would we need to make it clear that we do this? Yes, and the reasons why with consent from the client. For example, keep in mind the right to be forgotten and the right to erasure still exist even if they initially agree. And secondly, after business is concluded, keeping this information for contact purposes is not applicable unless there is a public health research need. Another question is, I use a project management tool over the cloud. It's called Avanza. The servers are in California. My company is based in Switzerland. My clients are in Switzerland and the UK. We use this platform also to exchange and store files. I wanted to know if this is okay to have a server outside of Europe. The provider assures me that this is the highest security and my clients are aware of the location of the servers. So this is acceptable only if that company is compliant with all GDPR requirements and the client has a way to request erasure and the right to be forgotten from the service provider based in California. Another one was asking about having a blog space as a hobby. It's quite long. I guess the questions are quite long, but I can pretty much summarize the response. So if you're handling EU residence information and the information is passing through various services, those services need to have GDPR compliance in place in order for you to be also compliant in your activities. So this means the right to be forgotten and the right to erasure must be part of your policy. Whether it's something that you're doing as a hobby or not, you're still holding on to information. In the last 8 years, cyber criminals have been targeting small to medium enterprises and not-for-profit specifically, and individual bloggers because they seem to have easier, they seem to be easier targets essentially to steal personally identifiable and personal health information. So just wanted to let you know, even if this is something that you're doing as a hobby, you are still, you still need to comply with cybersecurity regulations. So those are all the questions that we had received beforehand. So I'm open to questions now. So as Maggie had said, if you'd like to either input your questions into the chat box or if you want to ask questions, please feel free.
Sem, thank you so much. You've covered a lot of ground. I know this is a very complex topic, and this is a very short webinar, you know, less than an hour, kind of trying to track it. So I think one thing we can say is this is just very much kind of touching surface. But I've got a couple of questions that have come through to me on the chat box. So let's start with them. Somebody has said, I've read somewhere that you have to keep all data for say 5 to 6 years, and then during this session we're saying actually once the service has been delivered, then you can delete it. What is kind of true? What is the best thing to do? Is there like, you know, you need to save stuff for 7 years, or what would you kind of suggest?
Well, it depends. I mean, unless it's a health related, you know, field that they're in and that they must keep the data, that's different. But and if it's a public health research project, whereas if it's just related to, you know, I'm not sure where they read this particular article, so I don't know when it came out. So I mean, please don't quote me because I don't have any of the information handy, so I don't want to be giving out the wrong information. But based on just general GDPR requirements, you do have to have policies in place to erase that information as soon as possible.
Okay, so it would be a case of actually having to do the research and understand what is the most relevant for your industry sector.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
That's fine. And then I've got one more question at the moment on the chat. So listen, if any of you got any other questions that you'd like to ask, please do use the chat function and we'll make sure that we get to them. Nadia's asked, are there any useful sites or training, online training available specifically for the technology team or the IT person? So training that they can take to ensure that they understand what they need to be doing around the prevention of data breaches, and then helping sure that the technical side of the business is as GDPR compliant as it can be. I don't know if you've got any thoughts or advice or organizations you'd maybe suggest.
Well, I feel like whomever asked that question is, set me up so I can respond on behalf of my company. Thank you. So, I mean, from our perspective, this is what we do. We do offer webinars specifically for technical individuals where we can train them as a group. So if anyone's interested in that, please feel free to contact me. You have my email information here, so I can certainly work with your team and work within your budget. So that's something we do. And depends on what the other GDPR companies are doing. So right now, I'm not sure. I don't want to provide incorrect information. There may be some free sites through your, depending on the government or depending on the countries that you reside in, that have specific regulations for each of those individual locations. So you may be able to tap into those. You can certainly go on to the EU website and take a look, but I don't think they have specific training capacity information on those free sites. But I mean, if it's something that you'd like to speak to us about offline, please feel free to send us an email, and we can certainly give that information.
Great, thank you, Sem. So if you've got any more questions, please do use the chat function. Sem, I've got one, which I think might be the same for many small businesses. We use a lot of third parties.
Yeah.
Things like MailChimp for sending emails.
Yeah.
We're using SurveyMonkey for, feedback surveys. We're using, I use Dropbox to store my files. All these different things, as well as obviously we've got central systems, that are more mainstream, like Microsoft Outlook. Do you have any advice around us doing our own firms doing their own due diligence to check that their third-party suppliers, even the big ones like Outlook or MailChimp, that they've got things in place? Almost kind of sending them a request to say, we use your services, please can you confirm that you are GDPR compliant for the, I don't know if there's any guidance around it.
You should be asking for that, because that should be part of your policy that you have in place anyways. And if they don't, or if they say, yeah, we do, well, ask them for the actual policy from their organization and say, this is a requirement for us, for our organization. And they should be willing to do that, because they know if they are truly GDPR compliant, they should be more than happy to send you a PDF of their policy indicating that. Because whether you have a legal team or not, most organizations and businesses do work with a law firm, and they will be requiring this information to keep on file to ensure that you're protected. Because,
Okay. Great. So does anybody have any more questions for Sem before we close the session? The chat functionality is still there, but I'll definitely keep it open. So if you do have any more questions, please. Sem, I don't know if anybody's messaged you directly on the chat function. I can only see the questions that have come to myself or to everyone. So
I don't see anything else.
That's fine. That's okay. I just wanted you to double check. And then certainly, I know sitting here, I'm sitting in the UK, and certainly in many of the organisations that I'm part of, the different networks or different groups are, there's many different communications coming out now. These firms confirming that they are, that they want, that I'm still happy to be part of them and they're still happy to receive information. So you can also keep an eye out for things that are coming from other networks and look at the style and the way that they've positioned things. And there are, there's lots of different training available. I think Sem and I were chatting yesterday, and I think I referenced that the City of London, so the City of London itself, which looks trying to look after the businesses that are based in the City of London, they've had some online training that you can do and follow all the way through to obviously, programs like xahive can provide or face-to-face sessions. But I do think even though we're small businesses, or everybody needs to be looking at this and being aware of it, and it is quite a big piece of work. So hopefully today's session has been helpful and useful, even if it's just making you think some asking yourself some more questions. But Sem, I don't know if you've got any final comments that you'd like to leave everybody with.
Sorry, I have a few comments. We recently just finished doing a review for some, hospital systems based in the UK. And they looked at not only, when we did the review for the hospital system itself, but we looked at their third-party vendors. So that included the small businesses. So they too had to undergo a review along with the ones that we did, and they found that it was very helpful to have it. And because they were part of this hospital system review, they lucked out and they got, the full package. Now, I don't want people to think, oh my gosh, it's a lot of money to do the reviews, because even if it's not us, if you go to bigger companies like KPMG, PricewaterhouseCoopers, they charge quite a bit of money to do the cybersecurity reviews or help you create policies and procedures. But it really depends on the organization, and you need to ensure when you are working with a cybersecurity company that they are CIS certified and that they do actually do work in GDPR compliance. Because a lot of people will say, oh yeah, I do that, but then when you go down and you start asking them about requirements, they are not able to meet those requirements. So it's very important, especially as a small business, because your budgets are limited. You want to ensure that you have the proper procedures and policies in place.
Great. Sem, thank you very much. I don't think there's any more questions. Nothing else has come through on the chat functionality, but I'll definitely, your details are on the screen, and I'll certainly share your contact details with everybody with the follow-up and the link to the recording. So I'll just say thank you very much for sharing your knowledge. Actually, thank you to everybody for dialing in today. I hope it was useful. I say this is, obviously the deadline is May, but it's something that's going to be going on and on. So this isn't going to be a topic that's disappearing anywhere soon. So Sem, thank you so much. Everybody have a fantastic weekend, and I will look forward to being in touch with you about future WeConnect International webinars and events. So thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Sem.
Bye.